Welcome to Cybersecurity Where You Are, the Center for Internet Security's podcast. I'm Sean Atkinson, CISO at CIS.
And I'm Tony Sager, Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist at CIS. Cybersecurity affects us all, whether we're online at home, managing a company, supporting clients, or running a state or local government.
So join us on Wednesdays as we discuss trends and threats, explore security best practices, and interview experts in the industry.
Together, we'll clarify these issues, creating confidence in the connected world.
Hello and welcome to the show, Cybersecurity Where You Are. I'm Sean Atkinson, CISO here at the Center for Internet Security, joined by the host with the most, the Hall of Famer, the difference maker, Mr. Tony Sager. Tony, how are you, sir?
Great, Sean. Great to be back.
Fantastic. Great to have you here, sir. Joined by Rob T. Lee of SANS, Chief AI Officer. Rob, how are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you guys? Good to see everyone.
Doing fantastic.
Good to see you.
Great to see you. And our Chief Technology and Innovation Officer here at the Center for Internet Security, Brian Colkin. Brian, how are you, sir?
Doing great, Sean. Glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. So we wanted to start a conversation. We started and we've seen, I think early June, we saw an AI executive order. Has some elements that I think are worth discussing. Now, when we're looking at some of the verbiage, some of the language used in the executive order, it's being called voluntary, but respectfully, the government is asking for 30 days early access to frontier models before these are released. Setting some the threshold set by the NSA, I believe, for an underlying process. So as we're starting to think about frontier models, development, and working with federal agencies in the space, specifically national security agencies, voluntary, does that actually feel like what it is? Or is it setting a precedent that we need to potentially understand in terms of innovation, distribution of capability? And it leads us to export control and things that we've seen in the past year. But Tony, let's start with some thoughts here and see where this takes us.
Sean, you came out swinging on this one. No holding back.
Shouldn't we have a drink first?
Right.
I tell you, this whole question of so the technology is so full of such potential and so foundational. And this tries to mirror past processes. How should we as citizens have confidence in the properties, the security, the safety of something so complex and so so new to us? And so this idea of the government acting as a gatekeeper or offering some kind of statement of confidence and sort of out of sight of the public, and then coming bringing back that it has the desired properties is sort of mirrors some of the traditional ways. And I was involved with some of this, just to let you know, in my days at the National Security Agency, and on a much more smaller scale about individual vulnerabilities and the role that they would play in, what should we do with them as a nation. But I'd see this as part of a larger attempt to understand what are the security things we should worry about. And how should we generate confidence in the power that we're putting into the hands of the technology? So, and it's a complicated issue. Rob, I'm going to ask you for your insight though, because you've studied these things a lot. You're right on the edge of what's happening here. And what would give you confidence? And is it a government opinion, or what is the way that we should think of confidence in the?
Well, first of all, I appreciate that level of confidence that you said. I've studied this a lot.
Well, as much as any of us here.
This is the hard part about all this. And I think one of the points you made at the beginning, voluntary is a very interesting word here. But before we even dive into that, I think the government has a clear responsibility. And I applaud the effort because, and I'll just make it a very clear analogy here, that it's not up to the airlines to make sure that there are truly no bad guys on their planes. If you think about it, government has access to, bad actor lists. They have access to intelligence. They have access to a lot of other details that regular people and companies just don't have access to. And then, how do we create a homogeneous system where all the airlines, including the startups, have the same capability to, monitor and create policies of, who's allowed on their plane, who's not. Now, granted, we're talking, general security. Airlines have their own policies. If someone gets on, if they're, inebriated or something like that, totally different thing. So I think this is the digital equivalent of that, because unlike Google, unlike, I'm trying to say at 30,000 to, really explain why this is a big deal. Unlike Google, unlike other technology sets, you're not really able to cause widespread harm. With the latest frontier models, and I actually had a conversation with several Hill staffers about this specifically, saying, "Are you tracking this?" And they wasn't on their radar that much because it sounds cybersecurity and like, oh, it's technical. Someone breaks into something, who cares? And I said, well, let's take an extension of that, biosecurity. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, the same models, and they've already been able to show they're 94%. This is the stunning thing. I went and looked. 94% effective of an expert level biochemist or a gene specialist. And we start to getting to those levels, you start to be able to say, well, I wonder if, and there's a lot of things that you might be able to discover in your garage by just asking it the right questions and saying, well, how was Ebola formed? How is these things? And then you start saying, well, let me go play around with these things. Everyone takes a step back and then says, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Someone could be playing in their garage, just a single person, with things that are almost weapons grade biological. And you can see where I'm going with this. I'm like, yes, the latest frontier models logarithmically increase that by almost a factor of 100. No one's really talking about the bio side of this, because cybersecurity is the one that, is where they pump the brakes first, thankfully. When you put it at that level, the government's responsibility needs to step in, so we're not leaving the security of these models, of who can access, who isn't. Government's working with them to saying, here are these appropriate guardrails that is our expectations. We need to work hand in hand together to be able to make this thing sing. Just like the airlines work directly with the TSA to be able to create as secure an environment as possible. Now, it's not risk-free, as we know. And a lot of people in our world also, call a lot of what TSA does is security theater. But if you look at the new technologies that are being utilized, they're pretty decent at detecting bad things going through that gate. So my argument is, before we dive into some of the other things like voluntary and everything else, I truly believe that there is a government responsibility, that they need to be involved. And I'm glad that this direction was set.
Excellent. Brian, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I just want to circle back. I think Rob called it out. I think we all sort of danced around it, but I think the word voluntary is very interesting to me, right? So I think that there's like, the way I view it, there's this like, there's like an asymmetry in the power dynamic between the government at large, and then you've got these models and these organizations, these labs. And so, it's like you can give us access to your models if you would like. The choice is yours. I think, though, the saying no carries some pretty, drastic consequences in terms of, potential working with the government contracts and funding and those types of things. I think all those things probably will tend to dry up and go away largely if you're the one that happens to say no. Again, within your right, you can do what you like. Just don't expect any money from us in the future, is sort of how I look at it. So I think anyway, that's my sort of thoughts on the whole voluntary piece. I don't know that it is as voluntary as trying to make it out.
Just to throw in there a little bit, the analogy I tell people about specifically the voluntary thing is like I tell my kids there's a lot of voluntary decisions they get to make. Whether I agree with those decisions are completely different.
Right.
You have a choice whether you go to school or not. Now, there's going to be some consequences if you voluntarily choose not to get in the car with me. You're like, no, there's laws and everything, but I'm like, well, let's, extend it to chores. Let's extend it to, trying to put the choice in their hands. But we all know, I think the government's trying to stay away from us because they knew a lawsuit would be there. It is your choice, but we all know that, are you considered on the list of working with us? Are you a friend of the government? Are you not? What does that mean? I think we all need to acknowledge that there is some consequences on either side of that. unnamed clearly. But we have to be really careful. It's like, is that a threat, or are they really trying to say it is voluntary, because we don't know exactly what that means right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that notion of voluntary, but guided to the right decision. I mean, Rob, I strongly agree with you. I mean, there is a common social good here, right, that we have to worry about. And that's what we expect from governments, is to provide some means. We navigate risk in our lives every day, all the time, but most of it we don't understand, and we count on kind of an infrastructure, right, of regulations and incentives and things like that. And the hope is that some science, some well-intended public policy comes together in a fashion that allows us to take advantage of technology, to live our lives as citizens and so forth. But the challenge is, how do you, and as we've all been in the cyber business for a long time, right? And here, seeing different administrations kind of swing from voluntary is not working, we have to regulate everything or mandate everything, back to voluntary, and there's kind of a cycle of that activity that goes on there. But I think we'd all love to see things like a common agreement across government and industry and experts in things like safety and so forth, about what properties do we all agree should be found in there. Are there a set of standards or requirements or things that we can use as decision factors that we should all agree on, and that we should become part of the fabric, whether regulated or whether made part of the marketplace through machinery like UL listings or things along those lines. So but it is a the other point, Rob, you made, which is really important, is the scale of this is so different than any other thing that we've talked about in our professional lives, which is this ability for folks to have access to what we'd have thought of as a nation state level capability, and things that can cause massive public harm are just astounding. So there is clearly a role for the government, some common action that we need to define, and I think some of it is about what are the forces that we would use to both create it. I do think that the people would be, the idea of saying, well, here's the government agencies that will handle this, it'll go off into some hidden place, you're not authorized to see what happens, and something will pop out at the end. I think that's not necessarily the path to generating public confidence, and I think that's, again, there's so many details not spelled out in the executive order, but it has a feeling of that it'll be out of sight with a specialized number of people in a secretive way, which I think is, might feel necessary up front anyway, in terms of protecting information. But boy, it really feels uncomfortable in terms of generating confidence for us ordinary folk now.
It does. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about companies in the space already in the military networks. I want to talk about some of the benchmarking process that you mentioned, Tony. Type of visibility, what type of results are we going to see from that, or is it going to be contained and respectfully kept within the organization submitting their models for review? But with that, we'll be right back.
Ever feel like cybersecurity is a giant jigsaw puzzle and someone forgot to give you the corner pieces?
Or the box lid, the table, or the time?
Exactly. That's where the CIS Secure Suite platform comes in.
It's your intuitive starting point for cybersecurity. One dashboard with the functionality of Syscat Pro dashboard and CIS CSET Pro built in.
From policy to implementation, it puts the puzzle together for you. CIS controls? Check. CIS benchmarks? Double check.
And it's built for CIS Secure Suite members. You're getting a streamlined experience with the guidance that turns data into decisions.
Like seeing where your biggest risks are and knowing exactly what to do next. Share results easily with internal security teams from one great tool.
Plus, it helps you align with frameworks like NIST and ISO, making you audit ready.
Whether you're a small team or a cyber underdog, the platform gives you the visibility, clarity, and confidence to act.
So if you're ready to stop guessing and start securing, visit cisecurity.org/securesuite to learn more.
CIS Secure Suite Platform. Cybersecurity simplified.
So we come back, Tony, and you touched on something there that I thought was very interesting. One of the other things I was also thinking in this space, just before we move on, is we've heard from a lot of the leads, or some of the leads in AI, that maybe we need to pause a little bit. We may be moving a little bit too fast. Again, we've got Mythos and the reaction from SANS and CSA and some of the work that we've done in that space. Very important that we're aware of the kind of the new normal in terms of AI and security. And we've heard that let's slow down. Maybe this is part of a process of not only slowing down, but contextualizing capability, whether or not it's truly aligned to advancement, or is it really putting us into a situation of uncontrolled chaos, as it were, in our environments, in our networks, in our infrastructure, and that affects not only business critical infrastructure. I mean, it has worldwide consequences. Are we seeing that as part of this assessment strategy, and how the NSA and some other agencies are going to be building benchmarking process to assess these most advanced models that are being provided into this assessment? Rob, any thoughts there?
I always go back to trying to really, how would I explain this to my neighbor who's not in this field? And one of the things I'd like to emphasize, especially as we're looking at the different frontier models as they're coming out, like, what does this look like now in the future? I believe and I feel that Mythos is the precursor, if not now the standard, to every frontier model that comes out. It's going to have this break pumping time frame that's going to occur. And as we're moving forward with these criteria, even with Fable 5, and again, I always worry about when these podcasts come out, but there was, it basically got pulled offline. There's some politics surrounding it, but, there's a truth to the center of it, which is we want to be able to restrict certain entities, foreign governments, people in the US, only US, so there's all these kind of questions that come into play. And they put it back on Anthropic, saying, unless you could figure out a way to do this, you have to pull the model down. So they, of course, voluntarily took the model down. But I go back to an argument I've made with several people, and it's one of the reasons I made that TSA analogy earlier, which is I think the only logical extension of what we see is that they're going to have to do some sort of authentication with people coming online. And the system's already there, whether we agree to it or not. But in order to board a plane today, you have to have an ID that has the true identification marker that's on it, and they'll then allow you through security. If you want to fly, this is what you need to do. I actually think for both organizations and individuals in the organizations, they're going to have to provide some sort of back end, whether it's a government layer on top of it or something that taps into the government. They're going to have to narrow down to per person who's touching it, what are they doing, and you're giving up a little bit of privacy in order to start working with the models, both from organization in addition to the individual. I know the privacy advocates out there says, whoa, state monitoring, but I will then look at them, with the sharp eye and saying, do you fly? And then pause and like, what information do you need to be able to hand over to be able to get on a plane? And then go out and fill out your driver's license and so forth. You have to have a passport, number one, or number two, you have to have a, true ID. You're giving up a little bit of privacy to fly on a plane. It's troubling if you're a full privacy advocate, but at the same time, you have to weigh the security of what some of these models can do. There's also another thing I've mentioned to others is, like, I don't believe a system like this is going to be fully implemented until we have an incident. It sucks, but September 11th showed us the inadequacies of airport security. What we're going to end up seeing here too is there might need to be a full incident for us to realize, like, okay, we just can't leave it this loose. There's going to need to be something in place. The system's already there. It would surprise me if they don't do some sort of extension of that from the physical, what we have at TSA, into digital.
That's a great point.
That's a very good point.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian, please.
I couldn't agree with Rob more on that last point in particular. I think because cybersecurity in general tends to be a pretty hard sell in most cases, unless you've experienced the pain that is derived from going through an incident. And so it's not a problem until it's a problem. But I tend to, there's an analogy that I tend to use depending on what I'm talking about specifically, but it's like, I've got smoke detectors in my house, but I've never had a fire. I'm not going to pull the smoke detectors out because I've never had a fire. No, of course I wouldn't. That's crazy. You wouldn't forego, proper cybersecurity practices and monitoring and all those types of things because you've never had incidents. Just sort of it's what you do, right? We refer to it at CIS as our cyber hygiene. You're doing the things you need to do to kind of keep yourself prepared for hopefully never happens, but the inevitable day is of when you do get hit with something. So anyway, I think that Rob's exactly right. I think that this stuff as it relates to AI and a lot of the risks and things we're talking about aren't a problem until they're a problem, and then I think we will hopefully respond accordingly. But it's going to have to we'll have to get to that point, I think, before we really have a lot of this stuff come to light.
That's right. That's right. And I think, I like the analogy too, because it a little bit, poetic license here, but it's not just getting on a plane, but in the right hands, that's a fighter jet, right? That we're getting access to that can cause mass destruction. And it's, we've got to assess the right hands and the right model that can be utilized. Again, there's great utility, leading me down a path thinking, AI is becoming critical infrastructure at this point. The dependence that we're starting to see and the utility that it has, a classification in that space wouldn't surprise me in the near term. And I think everybody's, still trying to integrate the AI. What's it look like? And again, the velocity we've seen in the last few years is really transformational in terms of business process, practice, cybersecurity, really everybody's utility of how it can be used and applied. I mean, ultimately, every day there's new capability that we're seeing and constantly evolving. But it really relates then back to understanding the risk, but also setting these benchmarks. And I think one of the problems that you'll see, and then it'll be the naysayers, well, the benchmarking process is flawed because of these reasons. And I think that in itself is going to be an iterative process because of the model advancement over time. I think there's an agility that's going to be needed through assessment in order to, I don't think they're going to get the right balance first time with version 1.0. But do you see that being a problem, Tony, as we move forward, that's just going to be that there's unfair treatment, or we're not getting the full capability or capacity that everybody's striving for? Mythos was released under Project Glasswing. Everybody wants access, right? We need to see what this can do. And going through this program voluntarily, does that undermine any advanced capability or minimize and get into, conspiracy, or keeping the better stuff for government and releasing the commercial non-capabilities outward with those organizations?
Sort of following on from something Rob said, the nature of security and public policy in general that drives it, right? I used to say oscillates wildly around the evolution of technology, right? It reacts, he overreacts, or ignores, overreacts. Something just popped up in an old feed of mine today. Remember, I know this is so cheesy, late 90s, the Furbies, and the big headline, NSA banishes Furbies on the workplace, right? Because of the belief that they could record. But
they were evil.
They were evil. Well, that's right. Independent of them spilling state secrets. But my group, one of my groups, did the testing for things like, and there would always be this flood of emails. Why can't I bring my MP3 player to work? Or those kinds of things, right? There would be this ongoing cycle of new technology. Everybody wants it, got to have it. I didn't know that yesterday, but I need it today. And then the security people trying to figure out, they sort of miss it for a while. They react, they often overreact, and it becomes this kind of cycle of evolution. And we're likely to see that, right? None of us understands all the implications because, as you said, every week there's something exciting that's happening, and the adoption is driven by the excitement, right? New capability, and I don't want to be the last to get it. I want to be on the leading edge. So we're in this kind of classic, back and forth over, having access to technology that could improve our productivity, for example. At the same time, is it safe, or is it secure, or is it whatever our property was? So part of this is we have to recognize that whatever comes out of from the executive order, or whatever comes out from an industry benchmark or whatever, needs to adapt, right? It has to be prepared to change, because that's going to be the nature of our understanding of technology. It takes time for technology, I think, from the viewpoints that we bring, security, to be understood well enough to see the implications of it. At the same time, no one, it's a hard lesson for me at NSA. No one was breathlessly waiting for the government wonks to tell them that this computer security thing was safe enough, right? They're like, no, I need Excel right now. I need PowerPoint right now. And, you guys are holding me back. So there's no, you have to be prepared for a mad rush of adoption. At the same time, there's a responsibility, the responsibility Rob talked about of, what we expect as citizens, right? Some activity that protects us from things that we really can't understand the risks of. But in this case, it's again so wide, so broadly powerful, so fast moving that we have to be prepared then for how do we be flexible in the benchmarks, the requirements, the expectations that we have set for this here. And I don't know that we have a lot of history of sort of figured that. Yeah, Rob, what do you think?
I'm like trying to
No, please.
One of the things I love, we're approaching our 250 years here in the United States, and
Yeah,
one of the things that this is not this is what the debate's about.
Mhm.
And everyone that's in the technical side, you might think, well, that's a policy side. I shouldn't have, a lean in on that. But that's exactly what we need folks to do, is be the translators in the room. You understand the technology, and those of you who are really good at seeing the technology and trying to translate into what the effect is on policy and privacy, your role is super important today, more so than anything else. You're going to be, if you're doing it in your companies, you need to talk to local politicians. You need to talk to those, who are your neighbors, and almost in an advocacy standpoint, just to be able to talk about what this means. Because when you talk to the average person about ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, they're still primarily using it as a fancy Google. And they have not tied it together into, what do you mean it's a threat? It's like, I go back to your example, it's a Furby. It literally looks totally innocent. What is the big deal? That discussion of the translation, what Tony was doing in those days in the NSA, was a translator of not one direction, but both directions. Is the technology needs to be understood by the technologist, why it's a threat, but the reverse is also true. And this is so complex today. Everyone on this call, everyone who is somewhat decent at taking really complex things and putting it on how would you describe this in 2 sentences in the Wall Street Journal? That type of responsibility needs to sit with all of us.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you're exactly right. That we use that word translate. That is, I used to have, when I was running technical organizations, I used to have to almost beg technical people to go to policy meetings, and so we have to be there because well-intended policymakers don't speak this technology. That's not where they live, but they feel responsibility, right? They want to protect citizens or whatever they have a really important job to do for society, and we want them to do it well. But they don't come from the technology. They don't speak that language, and so there'll often be this wild overreaction, right? Well, we need to ban it because it's dangerous. Well, no, we want the benefit of it also. So what is the ground that speaks to this? But Brian, you made a point, and we've had a discussion here recently, playing on what Rob said, right? Cybersecurity can be a hard sell, but policymakers are knocking on the doors of CIS every day. Help me understand this AI thing, right? It's become an opener for a conversation that's been a little hard to get started in the past. What do you think from a CIS mission perspective, Brian?
I mean, I think that is that. I think Tony, you said it. I think that is our mission. I view us as we are the ones that can help, sort of, and that's why I enjoy being on this podcast. Sort of to make a distinguish between the sort of noise and the hype and the media and all of that and what's going on out there in the world and what really matters and what is really talking about. I think that it's super important. And I think that policymakers, certainly, I think even some, well-intentioned executives certainly try to do the right things for, on behalf of the country or perhaps even their own organization, but tend to not fully understand the issues, the problems, and certainly how to correct them or what it even take to correct them. And so we just find ourselves continually walking this line of, we even see it at CIS. We want to embrace technology. We want to use it. We want to leverage it for all the good things and the great stuff it can do. However, we want to be careful, right? We don't want to it's not the wild wild west. We don't want everybody just to go gangbusters on it, and then we find ourselves in a sticky situation. So it's the governance overlaid with the utilization and the usability of the thing. And I think it's a fine line. And that's how I see this executive order in a lot of ways as well. As as we as a company, Rob mentioned, we're close to our 250th birthday, which is pretty awesome, I have to say, in and of itself. But we want to be seen as the sort of the leaders out there in the world amongst this in this space. And I think it's the same line that we're trying to walk. Is we want to, sort of sort of fumbling for words, but kind of stand behind our American companies in Anthropic, and OpenAI and Google, and say, yeah, go do great things. We want you guys to be the best out there. However, hold on, it's a little too fast. Slow down. We're gonna pull some of those models back. And so I think I get it and understand it. That's kind of what we're talking about. But I think every time we do that, we let our adversaries and competing countries out there get a step ahead potentially, as we're trying to do the right thing and slow down. They're pedal to the metal and foot on the gas and trying to march forward as quickly as possible. So again, it's the line you got to walk. Rob's got his hand up. I'm sure he's got something awesome to say. So
he always has something awesome. That's true.
May or may not be. Brian and both you and Tony, we're leaning in on something. I think it's important. I think trying to understand and look at this pragmatically needs to be taken back an even further step, which in discussions in behind the doors. So you have the discussions in open doors, everyone's watching what you say. And behind the scenes, you talk to folks, and especially on the leadership side, it says, yeah, I don't really understand what's going on. And I'd like to really emphasize a point that not enough organizations and leaders in the organizations truly understand that you need to push this technology base back to the way it was in the late 80s, early 90s, is that most people who did cybersecurity were system admins. Most hackers were doing hacking were system admins, but it wasn't even considered bad to do hacking. You did I wonder if, and you did something, but you were building a web server, you're building a SendMail backend. And I think there's an aspect of this that for every single leader that's out there, I want to ask them, in closed doors, of course, have you built an agent? And then they look at me like I'm challenging them. I'm not challenging. I'm just honestly, have you built an agent? What is the highest level technological touch point have you done with this? She's like, why leave that to other experts? I'm like, are you sure that they've done it? I mean, go back to your teams and say, hey, everyone, today, let's all build an agent and show each other's, an agent. And I said, don't do a security one. Tell them to do something that's going to be efficient to increase their workflow. Build an agent that reads all their emails and make sure that, which one is a technical one, which one needs a ticket. Someone else write an agent to scour the web for research related to, new vulnerabilities. I would like to reemphasize how important this is, because I was on a board, just a quick story on this, or panel, and it was with a bunch of board members. I don't know why they asked me up there, because, it was really smart people and then me. And I asked them the question, who are you getting your advice from on the AI business transformation? Is, well, we have an expert we've hired. And I said, well, that's equivalent to someone in the late 90s, the executives and the board, saying, hey, our entire internet strategy is based on one person that's used the web and done email. Every single one of you has a responsibility to use the technology that you're setting the company strategy for. And I pulled up my phone. I said, I'm going to take a picture. And I just whispered it in my phone. And while I was still talking, I had it convert that picture into having them look like it was K-pop demon hunters on the stage.
great.
And I did this intentionally, saying, I went down and showed them the picture. It was a really good picture, by the way.
Are you doing that to us right now, Rob? We just have to know.
I should have, make us look like the Brady Bunch from the 70s. And the reason I did this, I said, you, from an executive, if someone comes to you and says, hey, we'd like to hire 2 more graphics designers, and you look at this, well, I was able to take a picture and convert that into something that's graphic design level quality. I'm sure you guys do it much better than I can. Why do we need these 2 new people if I'm able to do it on my phone and I'm not even trained? And just asking those small questions leads you to the skills that's necessary to ask the big questions. So from a security standpoint, we're all scared that everyone thinks of us. We're supposed to have all the answers. I challenge a lot in security that I would say good 60, 65% of us haven't ever built an agent. There's a smaller percentage that have and are doing the really cool stuff, and we're already kind of latching onto their thought process. But I'm going to even ask on this call here, how many of you actually built an agent? How many of you built 5? Until you've done that, I really would say, hey, lean back, take yourself out of the equation, have you and your team go back to fundamentals, build time in your session to do this, then go back to the basics like it was, configure a SendMail server to know how to defend a SendMail server. Right now, we're just jumping to defend technology we don't understand, which has led to a framework of no in most organizations. And the reason I bring this back, we're supposed to be in these policy discussions as to why this is a threat without even understanding of how to get a tool approved in our own organizations. This does not compute. This is creating friction unintentionally that we need to get around, and the security community needs to say, hey, this is so brand new that we have to go back to the basics. I know that's a little bit of a parent lecture there, but it's what I've had to do because I truly don't know what the hell I'm doing. I am every day struggling and testing things.
Yeah, but I think it's in combination because, I lean on Brian then in these spaces, right? It is where are we making, we've got to combine. So Brian's done a ton of work in the space. So I defer to him and say, here are my issues. These are the risks I'm thinking about. Contextualize these for me. Are they the right risks? Am I asking the right questions? Then Brian will come back and say, well, think about it this way. And using the analogies and everything we've talked about today helps me then do the appreciation to the point where it builds the interest. To Rob's point, I really do think, and Rob, I've often said, with respect to boards of directors and things that are talking about cybersecurity, you've got to have some of that innate knowledge in the board. Finance, everybody's got finance at that level. Got to get to these levels that we're playing with table stakes and not just things we've heard or things we're ourselves hallucinating about in terms of what the AI can actually do and how it can be construed as bad within the environment. So completely get the point there as well. Wonderful. Well, we didn't cover half the questions I wanted to cover, but again, we'll probably just have to do a part 2. Rob, Brian, again, thank you. It's again, for me, learning. We're all on this journey together. We've got to figure out where we fit into a narrative of. And when I saw benchmarking, I was like, maybe there's a private-public partnership we can do in this space that we can help contribute to some of these elements and some of the best practices that the NSA and other agencies are building. Again, the work, Rob, through SANS, CSA. Really agnostic and prompted. I mean, just really great stuff. We've got OWASP, we've got MITRE Atlas. There's a lot of the framework. I think it's now the application, how we start to build a capability that we understand. And I think to your point, absolutely 100%. But with that, again, comes to the end of the episode. Tony, thank you, sir. Brian, Rob, thank you. Great episode. And to the audience, thank you very much. Make sure to subscribe in all the usual ways with your preferred podcast provider. Catch us on YouTube at the CI Security. Questions, comments, concerns, drop us a line at podcast@cisecurity.org. And with that, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the podcast today.
The thoughts and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect those of CIS.
Tune in on Wednesdays for a new episode. And in the meantime, visit our website at cisecurity.org.
Together, we'll continue our efforts of creating confidence in the connected world.